Good evening. All right, I would like to call to order the Board of Education meeting, Skokie 68, November 18th, 2021. We will open the floor to public comment and after I ask for a roll call.
Bill Jordan.
Here.
Espinoza.
Here.
Joseph.
Here.
Ruffner.
Here.
Sturbin.
Here.
Sullivan.
Here.
Warshaw.
Here.
Thank you.
And now we will open to public comment. Remember, this is not a dialogue between you and the board. If you have a specific issue which requires a response, Superintendent Garwood or the appropriate person will get back to you. Please state your name and your connection to Skokie School District 68. Please limit your remarks to no more than 5 minutes. And finally, avoid comments specific to any person, student, or staff member respecting their right to privacy.
Anyone else? No. Okay. Hi, my name is Jill, and I'm a parent at Highland Elementary. And thanks for hearing me out tonight. I'm just trying to provide a voice that may not be heard too often these days. Dr. Garwood kind of showed me where the testing site is. So my other question regarding the weekly saliva shield testing is there a way to access like cumulative data for District 68 instead of just the weekly? Because I think it just shows a weekly situation. So that's one of my questions. In other words, could we see, since the shield testing began, kind of what those numbers look like possibly? And I'm also wondering, is there a way that our elementary schools could test the newly vaccinated weekly as well? I'm concerned that vaccinated individuals spread more asymptomatically. And why wouldn't we include them in weekly testing? They can transmit, they can catch COVID. Do we care about transmission and contact tracing, or do we omit this group simply to offer a reward for getting vaccinated? I also have heard from my daughter today that several classmates came to school today feeling sick after their shots, and I'm just wondering if that's a really great idea to just put all these newly vaccinated people into a group of their peers 3 feet away. Regarding teachers and staff, I have read that due to the mandate for all employees at District 68, at this time we have 99% of our employees fully vaccinated, while the remaining 1% have a temporary exemption. My question is, why temporary exemptions? And does this high vaccination rate of 99% for employees and staff correlate with funding for our schools? Has the district or board been pressured to obtain a certain threshold of vaccinated employees in order to receive funding of any kind from the state or federally, or in order to avoid paying back money given to the district during the pandemic? I'm also interested in knowing how we as parents can find out about this kind of information. We have 99% vaccinated. We have a leaky vaccine that doesn't prevent transmission to others. Essentially, it does not contribute to herd immunity. So does our vaccinated staff now call in sick more often? Are they having more heart attacks and strokes, blood clots, neurological symptoms, and new cancer diagnoses? Are we really more safe with a triple vaxxed teacher with waning effectiveness and risks of increased risks of adverse events? Or would that healthy unvaxxed teacher that we just fired and denied their religious exemption actually be just as safe? Inclusion and diversity. We talk about that, but not what it includes a diverse way of looking at health. We are now practicing exclusion and coercion. And if the shot worked and it kept people out of the hospital, we would not need a booster. I have a recent quote from Dr. Anthony Fauci from the Daily Podcast, which I believe is from the New York Times, possibly. And in this quote, he's talking about vaccinated individuals. I'll start the quote now. We are starting to see waning immunity against infection and waning immunity in the beginning aspect against hospitalization. And if you look at Israel, which has always been a month to a month and a half ahead of us in the dynamics of the outbreak and their vaccine response, and in every other element of the outbreak, they are seeing a waning of immunity, not only against infection, but against hospitalization and to some extent death. End quote. So when I look around at our community and our student body, we have this beautifully diverse student body here in Skokie, and I'm kind of new to the district. But what I think I'm seeing is, maybe first generation Americans, second generation, maybe third generation. We've got 55 different languages spoken in our school. That's amazing. Why did these families come to the U.S.? They came here for opportunity. They came here for freedom. They came here for religious freedom, personal freedom, medical freedom. I feel we're going down a very scary path, and this train is running fast. So I just encourage everybody to think about the direction this is moving in, and let's use critical thinking and common sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Phyllis, do we have any logged comments?
We do not.
Thank you. We shall move on to the superintendent's reports.
Okay, well, I have 2 items tonight. First of all, if you were not aware, tomorrow is School Board Appreciation Day in the state of Illinois. So I am going to get my opportunity to read a resolution proclaiming tomorrow is School Board Appreciation Day. So whereas school board members are elected to sit in trust for their diverse communities, in that capacity are charged with meeting the community's expectations and aspirations for the public education of their children. And whereas school board members are entrusted with the guardianship and wise expenditure of scarce tax dollars, and they are responsible for maintaining and preserving the buildings, grounds, and other areas of the school district that the community has put in their trust. And whereas school board members are responsible for providing leadership that ensures a clear shared vision of public education for their schools, that sets high standards for the education of all students and requires the effective and efficient operation of their districts. And whereas school board members adopt public policy to give voice to that leadership and employ a superintendent to administer board policy, and are also responsible for the regular monitoring of the district's performance in compliance with state policy. And whereas school board members selflessly volunteer countless hours to public service with no compensation, other than the chocolates and certificates that are in front of you today. Whereas school districts have faced enormous challenges over the past 2 years, and the strong, dedicated leadership provided by the Skokie School District 68 Board of Education has allowed student learning and success to continue. And whereas employers are supportive of their employees who serve as school board members, generously lending support and time, employers give their employees the opportunity to better serve the needs of the school district and the communities they represent, through sometimes tremendous sacrifice to the employer. And whereas decisions made by school board members directly impact the quality of life and safety in their communities, placing them in the front line of American democracy. Therefore, be it resolved that we hereby proclaim November 19th, 2021 as School Board Members' Day, as a way to honor these citizens who devote their time and energy for the successful education of our children and our future leaders. So on behalf of the entire Skokie School District 68 community, I would like to thank you all for your selfless service to support me, to support the children, the teachers, and the parents of this community. It is noted, the character and tenor of our school board and the civil way our board meetings always play out are a reflection of all of you. So thank you very much on behalf of everyone. perfectly. It's 7:10. An email just went out to the community.
As you were reading.
Proclaiming.
I was like, oh, Jim just sent an email while he was reading.
I tried to calculate, how long will it take me to read this?
Amazing.
So, there we go.
Well,
All right. So again, thank you all very much.
A pleasure.
Okay, so our second big topic for superintendent updates is our return to learn update. Got quite a few updates here. As you probably started to hear, COVID is starting to trend upward. The last couple of weeks, it's, after about a month of sort of a slow, steady decline with the Delta variant, for the last couple of weeks, it started a slow climb back up in the other direction. We're hearing that Europe is in pretty bad shape. They're having a surge similar to what we had last year in about this time. And there's predictions that we may experience more of a surge, going forward. I read an article today about there's three real variables here that are going to shape what this winter looks like for us. And essentially, those variables are vaccination rates, new variants, and our actions, what we do to protect ourselves and each other. So with COVID slightly trending upward, I've got some good news. We've just got done with our third vaccination clinic today. We've done our 3 elementary schools on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Tomorrow we have another one at Old Orchard. And on Saturday we have another one for anybody in the district to come to with their kids. Specifically targeting parents who could not come to one of the vaccination clinics during the school day, but who wanted to be with their children. As we've been getting kids signed up, they've been handing their consent forms in. We're hearing from some parents, we've already taken care of our first dose through our pediatrician. So at the moment, I think we've vaccinated a little over 400 kids so far this week. We're not quite sure how many will be coming on Saturday, and we're not entirely sure how many have been vaccinated outside of our clinics at this time. We know we had a good number of 12-plus-year-olds already vaccinated over at Old Orchard. We're hoping by the end of next week to be able to have an idea of what percentage of our kids are vaccinated. Our nurse is able to access that in the health department's website, so we can actually try to get some data for you to let you know we're up to this many, this percentage of kids who've been vaccinated. The next big question as our students start to get vaccinated is, so what? So what does it mean when a certain percentage of kids get vaccinated? At what point does that mean changes for our mitigation plans? And I don't really have any answers for you tonight about that. I think everybody's starting to grapple with that. We're a little ahead of the game with starting our vaccinations rolling, but I would anticipate in the next month or two, we'll start getting some guidance as to what people might, or organizations might recommend we could do once we reach certain thresholds. I don't anticipate that we are going to be at that threshold before Christmas to make any changes yet. I think with the way things are going, we do not anticipate changing any of our mitigation efforts, certainly not between here and winter break. And we'll just have to see what conditions are in terms of vaccination and how different variants may be evolving at that time. So we are still going to keep our heads down, keep educating our kids to the best of our capacity, and doing everything we can to keep everyone safe. After our last board meeting, I communicated with families that we now have on the website. There's a simple little counter that just tells you how many active COVID cases we have by building. It's a small number. We have had a little bit, a small outbreak at Devonshire in kindergarten, where I think we have 4, I think maybe a 5th child today with COVID, and as well as a staff member in the building. So what the health departments advised us to do is for the kindergarten group that they do shield testing twice a week for the next month. So we started to work on that. And we're hoping that extra monitoring will get things into a better place. Let's see. We also had an update earlier this week, which threw us for a little bit of a curveball. The SHIELD test that we've been doing on a weekly basis. SHIELD is the overall umbrella organization, and they have healthcare providers come out and do the testing. Well, apparently the healthcare provider that we are using is ending their partnership with SHIELD. So we are going to get another provider, and we're in that transition process to another provider. The upside is we'll be able to continue doing SHIELD testing. The downside is we're going to have to go through a learning curve with the new provider. And we have sort of passed that rocky point and gotten to a pretty smooth operation. But we should be able to continue uninterrupted with just a little bit of extra work. I believe that's about all I have at the moment in terms of updates. Any questions? Yes.
For the health department, might be totally silly. Do they get the numbers of the kids, like from the pediatricians too? So it's not just who's going to the clinics, they have like an aggregate?
Yeah, so
Okay.
anybody who gets vaccinated gets put into the health department's database. So all of us are in, whatever databases, the health department database when we got our clinic, our vaccinations as well. So they pull from every source. Anytime somebody gets a vaccination, they have to put it into this database. So yeah, we should be able to see everybody who's vaccinated.
We seeing any adverse effects on the kids?
We thought the absence rate might, be a little bit lower in the days after the vaccinations, but it hasn't been affected in any kind of dramatic fashion. There might be a couple more kids at each one of the buildings the day after who are absent, but the kids don't seem to be affected by at the same rate that adults are when they with side effects. So.
My 12-year-old handled it much better than my 45-year-old. It's an estimate.
Yeah.
Not saying an exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very
We'll
much.
leave you to deal with that one at home.
She's not watching. She's driving to Arlington Heights tonight.
It's recorded.
Flies today.
It's recorded and on
Oh.
the public website to watch.
I'm gonna, when I show her this new diploma I got,
There you
she's
go.
gonna be real
All
excited.
right.
Hi, Jen. All right, we now call for a motion to approve the minutes from the October 21st, 2021 Board of Education regular meeting.
Second.
Espinoza,
Yes.
Joseph,
Yes.
Ruffner,
Yes.
Sturban,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Warshaw,
Yes.
Jordan.
Consent agenda is our next item of business. Does any member wish to remove any item for separate consideration? I call for a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the personnel report authorizing the hire and leave of absence for licensed staff, the hire, resignation, and leave of absence for classified staff, financial reports, pay orders, and expenditures, second reading for Board of Education Policy 6.235, access to electronic networks, and 6.260, complaints about curriculum, instructional materials, and programs, and the destruction of the closed session audio recording from May 21st, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Joseph,
Yes.
Ruffner,
Yes.
Sturban,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Warshaw,
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Espinoza.
Yes.
We now move to our reports and discussion items, starting with our NTDSE report. Ms. Espinosa.
All right, so we actually had a few different presentations, all of them revolving around early childhood education through NTSE. The first one, two teachers kind of were talking about in the 3-year-old classroom about how they've been working to adapt creative curriculum, which is what they use for kids with low incidence disabilities. It was very interesting, kind of the methods they were using there with the kids. There was an Early Childhood Alliance presentation working to increase enrollment in their fully funded programs, where they work to engage parents as partners there. And then the last one was the Early Head Start home-based program, which is for services for expecting parents as well as families with children up to 3 years old. So it's either a 90-minute in-person or virtual weekly visits where they kind of have play and learn socialization groups. So those are kind of 3 of their presentations, all revolving kind of around the same age group though this time. Talking about they are just going to be starting their strategic planning process. So that will take place on a Saturday in January. They'll be working to develop their goals for the next 5 years. And then asking that one person from each district attend, whether it's the delegate or, you know, someone from the district itself. They will be working on that. Next year, they'll be starting after Labor Day, and that's due to construction. They will still need that time at the end of the summer to finish up their phase work to be able to kind of get the year started. So it will be starting a little bit later at the actual Malloy facility. To date, they've had to close 4 classrooms, and mostly due to the fact that the students there can't really participate in the Test to Stay program. And I didn't write down the date, but I'm pretty sure right now they've already hosted their vaccine clinic at Malloy. What was that?
It's in a few weeks.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
It's
I
planned.
didn't write down.
Hasn't, yeah, it's planned.
Thank
Hasn't
you.
rolled out yet.
Yeah, no.
And we've been vaccinating any NTDSE students who are in our
Satellite
classrooms.
programs.
along with our-
Yeah, that was the one just for their program there. We also had 3, so there were 8 total Friends of NTDSE. So for those of you that might not know, that's a program that they use to kind of recognize people who have kind of been seen to go kind of above and beyond and help out either staff members of NTDSE or students of NTDSE. And so our district had 3. Sorry, let me pull it up. I think I had it pulled up in my email, and now, of course. I went to open the board book. I am so sorry. Maybe I should just print it up. There we go. All right, so the first one. Jill Markwart, thank you, at the Early Childhood Center. So what has been written about her was Jill has been very welcoming to us. She has been very helpful in showing us where everything is. She has offered to assist us several times. We are grateful to have such a person in the building that is new to us. We also have Ellen Ziarko over as well at the Early Childhood Center. Ellen has been so kind and welcoming from the first day we stepped foot in the building. She is always there to answer our questions and get us anything we need for the children or the classroom. And then Dr. Is it Weiss? Jean
Weiss.
Weiss,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Weiss meets and greets our students daily and always makes sure they are included in everyday activities and academics. She always makes staff feel welcome and part of the OOJH team. She is truly a friend of NTDSE.
And just for clarification, Jean Weiss was our interim assistant principal. She's done interim work for us 3 or 4 times now. And we have a new NTDSE early childhood classroom over there. So this is their first year with us.
That's nice.
We're enjoying having the little ones over there.
Wonderful.
And that was it for us.
Good news. Thank you very much. We move on to the EdRed report.
Yeah, so EdRed, for people that aren't familiar with it, is a consortium of roughly 80 different school district special education cooperatives in the north suburbs primarily that meet to discuss legislation that's pending down in Springfield, a little bit federally, to just make sure that our interests are being heard when those topics are being addressed downstate. We had a meeting about 2 weeks ago, it was on November 5th, that was both EdRed and it was a joint meeting with the Northwest Suburban School business officials. And so Ryan was a special guest as well, just in the background and helping to translate some of what the business side was discussing for me. The main topics for the Ed Red portion of the meeting were discussing a pending lawsuit that's been filed downstate in Macoupin County. It's been called the Austin lawsuit after one of the main plaintiffs. And it is challenging the legitimacy of a number of the different state mandates for masking, quarantining, mitigations in the schools. IDPH, ISBA, Governor Pritzker are all named, along with, at the time of the meeting, it was 131 different school districts in the state. And so far, there have been no substantive rulings of any kind. The state attorney general is trying to move the venue to a location that's a little bit more accessible, because even though it started downstate, it has grown to be statewide. I did enjoy the name of the judge. I am not making this up. Hearing the case is Judge Trumper. No matter what your political views are, I think you can enjoy that. We also discussed, at the time it was pending, but has now, as I understand it, been signed into law, amendment to the Illinois Healthcare Right of Conscience Act, which is something that I know school districts all over the area, and not just school districts, are now catching up with and figuring out how that will affect their practice. There's the federal vaccine law with a deadline that was being discussed of early January. But since that meeting, I know that's also been caught up in litigation, and it looks like that date might not be the date that it is actually put into effect. And that was really all that we focused on when it came to COVID and legislation and lawsuits related to that. The shift then really went much more into the business side and areas that are not my area of expertise, but about the changes in when and how the appeals are being ruled on here in Cook County with the relatively new assessor who has been attempting to be much more data reliant, but in doing so has also pushed a lot of the decisions back on appeals. And a long way of saying it's likely that property tax bills may be delayed beyond when they have been sent out in the past by a couple of months. And so school districts have to take that into account and be prepared as we're doing levies, doing other decisions, so that we know when bills will be going out and therefore money would be coming in. And then there was some discussion about changes to the teacher retirement supplemental saving plan and legislation and rules that may affect that, and questions that many districts have about the role that the districts would have. Would they be simply a participant? Would they have fiduciary responsibility? Things like that. So they look like positive changes, but there's a lot that still needs to be worked out. So overall, it was a very interesting meeting, and sometimes they might not be the most interesting meetings, but this one I thought was really informative and really helpful.
Wonderful.
And just a comment on the Conscience Act. So the governor did sign changes that will take effect on June 1st. And the Conscience Act was really the driver behind religious exemptions. So our exemptions were all granted on a temporary basis to be reviewed, as we go forward. So at that time, we'll make a determination on whether those will continue or not.
Thank you. Here we are, the moment we've been waiting for, financial projections.
With that kind of introduction, thank you very much for having me tonight. I know this is the most exciting presentation that we get all year, behind the budget, of course. But the financial projections that I provided tonight, just a quick overview. The intent of the projections are just to kind of identify trends that we see going forward. They represent a very conservative estimate of revenues and expenditures going forward, meaning we're probably going to not hit the expenditure amounts that we project, and hopefully exceed slightly the revenue projections that we have. But we never know. Very minor changes obviously can make big adjustments when you look 5 years down the line. Every year I kind of say when looking out, as long as we're good within 3 years, anything beyond that, when you kind of historically see that dip, that falling off the mountain kind of thing, anything beyond that 3 years, we can fix and adjust as long as we're good within those 3 years. And we are, so don't get excited, but don't get freaked out. Obviously, there's a great deal of uncertainty. Things change kind of very rapidly, economic-wise, state-wise, reform-wise. So again, they're kind of just they're here to kind of be a gateway, but not yet an end-all be-all. All right, I'll stop talking. Sorry. So looking at revenue, property taxes are our biggest source of revenue. They're over 80% of our revenue. Last year, looking at 2020, the EAV increased nearly 2%, which is great. Overall, over the past 5 years, it's increased nearly 30%. That was mostly due to the triennial reassessment last year, where we jumped up 15% in 1 year. But basically, over the last few years, we've been steadily increasing. And then, with that new assessor coming in, he really increased the assessments last year, which is shown over the 5 years average. The tax cap for 2020 is 1.4%. Last year it was 2.3%. It's been as high as 4.1 about almost 15 years ago, and as low as 0.1 in 2009. So you see kind of that big swing back and forth in just 1 year. The last 5 years, we've averaged 1.96%, so almost 2%. When I look today, between the October CPI and last year's December, because it's ranged from December to December, we're actually above 5 right now, which is the highest it's been since 1991. So we'll see if it stays there. Typically October to December the past few years, there hasn't been much of a swing, but we just kind of stick with our 5-year average has been our kind of historical run looking forward. But next year, who knows? Maybe, we might be having a bigger levy. New property has decreased from a high of 58.6 million 15 years ago with the new Optima buildings kind of came in and onto the tax rolls. And then 2 years ago, it was 0, which is a big hit going forward when looking at property taxes, because new property comes in and is assessed differently than kind of regular property going forward. So regular property, year after year, we can increase that CPI amount. New property, however, gets put into the big equation and the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of whatever. But basically, the new property comes onto new tax rolls and is added to the current levy every year. So really, when we get that new property, it's a big increase for us. So last year, we had a new property of just under $1 million, over 900,000. Reassessed with that 1.4% CPI is going to net us almost $23,000 new to our levy every year going forward. So every year now, when that property is reassessed, that kind of added in that $23,000 every year. So we can see back in 2007 with that 56 million, that added $1 million to our levy every single year solely for that property. When we get kind of now to the newer years and the new property kind of reducing, you can see at the bottom there that the growth over the last 5 years overall is just 230,000. So yes, that's 230,000 added every year from the last 5 years, but not nearly assessed when you're looking at the last 15 years because of that $1 million kick there. We are, kind of land strapped, which means, we can't keep building out and adding new property going forward. But when you have tear downs, when you have new commercial buildings going up, really it helps overall. Tax appeals have been an issue in the past for us. Last year with refunds of just errors by the assessor's office or appeals from commercial buildings, things like that, based on their assessments, we've paid back over $585,000 last year. Now, we didn't write a check for that amount. Basically, when the taxes are collected, they're resent back out to those taxpayers that appealed their taxes back. This year's a little less, which is $90,000, which typically that number at this point of the year is about $400,000. With the assessor kind of slowing down, he hasn't sent any appeal information or released any appeal information yet this year about the assessments, meaning basically they're way behind. I mean, typically they should be done by now and starting to move forward. But when you don't have the information out there, they're just behind. They're way behind. We're going to look and kind of see of when tax assessments are going to be done going forward. In March, you get that bill every year for 55% of your previous year's tax bill. Typically, statutorily, you're supposed to get the correct portion with the final assessment 6 months later. This year, I'm sure you all noticed, it was pushed back a little bit for October. I think it was due. Next year, potentially, right now talking about possibly a January of 2023 payment being due. Now, you pay the same amount, but getting a bill in January of 2023 for 45% of your taxes, and then another one due March 1st for 55% of your taxes, is going to hurt the checkbook, whether you save every month or not. But that's what they're looking at. The main issue for school districts is the cash flow and how they assess and receive taxes. You get a big chunk in February, March, and then to not get essentially 50% of 80% of our revenue for the year until the following January. Luckily, we're in a financial position to where we can handle that, but many school districts are not. Senate Bill 508 is new. That was signed into law this past end of summer. Senate Bill 508 says basically the tax appeals and the refunds that we've paid over the last year will be kind of put back on to the levy and reassessed and distributed to everybody again to make school districts whole. Basically, when we levy, we're asking for money that we should get as a school district, as a taxing body, and when people appeal, they take those revenues from us, and now we're short. Senate Bill 508 puts those appeals back on the levy and are redistributed and allows us to collect that money back again, making us whole, if you will. The assessor's trying to work with the Cook County Clerk. Cook County Clerk isn't necessarily sure how that's going to look because all the assessments and all the appeals aren't in for 2020, and the assessor hasn't released them. So right now they're saying we might be able to get you some information in May. We might not. I feel bad, being up here being like, hey, this is going to happen, but I don't know what it's going to look like. It's one of those things that people downstate kind of say, this is a good idea. It is a good idea. Somebody else will figure out how to do this, and that's just what we're dealing with right now. In the future, the district will be able to determine whether or not we want to have those refunds reassessed and distributed out. Right now, we're not able to make that decision until they find out how much the final assessment is, and then we can make that determination at that time. Any questions on taxes? I know that they're not exciting. They're worse to pay, but we rely on them. Other revenue looking forward, our corporate property replacement tax is kind of staying stagnant. Our interest income is staying stagnant at 1.7%. rate of return every year. And basically everything else is kind of leveling out or getting back to pre-pandemic amounts. State aid going back, federal aid kind of remaining constant, minus the ESSER funds. And then working cash bonds is something that we reissue going forward as they retire. That's revenue. Any revenue questions? Thrilling, I know. Expenditures. We are in the people business. Salaries and benefits represent over 70% of our overall budget. Enrollment is staying kind of constant, looking at the projections. Staffing increases over the next year are based on needs, but really the needs are based on the enrollment, so they should be relatively stagnant staffing in the projections going forward. Salaries increase between 2.0 and 3.7% each year. Benefits, again, here's where those conservative numbers come. We're going up 8%. There is a small shift in TRS. I know I've talked about this the past few years. I've reduced it and pushed it out even further. So this isn't the worst case scenario. This isn't even the 3/4 worst case scenario. It could happen. It might not happen. If it does, it's pushed out far enough to where it really shouldn't affect the majority of the projections going forward. Social Security and IMRF projected to increase 3.25%, which is based solely on the classified salaries that we pay Social Security and IMRF into. As you remember, we paid off our IMRF unfunded liabilities a few years ago, so that decreased 50% last year, which has been great. We went from a rate of just about 13%, so we paid 13 cents for every dollar to classified staff. Now we're down to 6.5. So we've literally cut it in half in 1 year, which has been wonderful. Other expenditures going forward, building projects. We just made our one-time payment to Malloy last month. So that's done. They've got our share. And then, continuing to look at other building projects, technology equipment, still fluctuate year to year, but we remain those constant. Special education, tuition, just at an increased rate of 8%. We've done a great job bringing those students back and reducing the tuition rates that we pay other districts. But that tuition, we're still estimating an increase of 8%. So overall, the number is down, but the down number, we still have increasing going forward. Same thing with contract busing. We have increased our special ed routes, which you'll see later tonight. But because we've been able to bring back so many of our students, we've been able to reduce our contract busing. But in turn, we need to provide additional special ed routes for our students, which we prefer anyway. We think we can give them better service than contract service. Utilities are expected to go up 3%. Mr. Nelson behind me did a great job. Unexpected, well, maybe he expected it, but a few years ago, we kind of locked in some of our utility costs going forward. We locked in a set rate going forward of gas and electric for a couple of years. Right now, since those rates are skyrocketing, we're kind of locked in, kind of staying steady for a few years. But overall, in the 5 years, we're expected to hit at least 3% annually within those 5 years going forward. All the other services and supplies, capital expenditures to increase 5%. Again, very conservative approach going forward. And with that conservative approach, we have a nice sled hill after 3 years. We don't have the full Thelma and Louise going off the cliff, which is nice.
Spoiler for Thelma and Louise. If anybody's-
Yeah, thanks.
Try using that reference in my college class, it won't go.
Maybe I'm dating myself or my. So overall, not that bad. Like I said, we kind of stay within that 3 years is really what we're looking at. We're kind of dipping and then back up with the resale of the working cash bonds. But overall, we're very solid. We're in a very stable financial position looking forward. You know, if we don't get revenue for 9 months, or a major portion of our revenue for 9 months, we will be fine. It shouldn't affect any of our services, any of our after-school commitments, any of our curriculum. We should still be able to offer the best and everything for our students that we can provide. Issues, yes,
Can I ask a really quick question
Yes.
on the slide related to salary and benefits?
Mhm.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding that the second main bullet from the bottom refers to the amount of TRS that you're projecting to have shifted to the district, and you said you're picking up 0.25%. Is that something across the state that other districts are doing? Is that our district's, specific kind of calculation, or are you being guided by maybe districts in our region, or?
that's definitely me a few years ago being scared when they were talking about cost shifts. The past few years, we've looked at a shift rate of 0.5% every year, kind of in 1 year, and then increasing 0.5% every year. It was talked about probably 5 or 6 years ago, when the state was really in a budget crisis, as one thing that isn't in the state constitution and the legislature could easily do and move their burden onto school districts. It's just one of those things that have stuck with me.
Yeah,
Probably.
I guess I was just wondering whether this particular rate was something that you were, using your kind of best information and wisdom to land at a 0.25%, or were you being guided by?
Definitely just my own wisdom. I haven't heard it anywhere else in a few years. So because I haven't heard it and I haven't heard any rumblings about it anytime recently, I reduced it and pushed it out a year further, but still kind of left it in there as a just in case, kind of thing going forward.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. I was just wondering
Yeah.
about the particular percentage that you decided to, just the minimum, but just
No, when
keep
it
it
first-
alive.
Yeah, when it first came out, I think they were talking about kind of an incremental, over time, every year, increasing it. And, I think there was a lot of talk about 0.5%, starting at 0.5%. Because there were also a lot of districts struggling at that time too, because at around the same time, they weren't sending tax bills out until November, December, so history definitely repeats itself. And again, I haven't heard anything about it, but I just kind of, I cut it in half myself because that's what it was at the time, but
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering what your thought process was in terms
Yeah.
of landing on the 0.25%.
Yeah,
I get the bigger picture.
right. I didn't want it to be that, the world is falling scenario, because it's not. I mean, realistically, we're in a good spot right now. I think inflation is going to hit at some point, but I think as of right now, the district is in a very good spot financially.
Thanks, Brian.
So issues going forward. Obviously, the challenges with that trend line are expenditures, exceeding revenues and going up at a much higher rate than the revenues are. Again, as long as we're within that 3 years, we're able to kind of change things and make sure that we kind of keep that steady line, or at least we're able to offer all the same programs and make adjustments as we can. The limited ability to kind of control those sometimes is hard, but yet we've got a new teacher's contract for 5 years, which again, when you're in the people business and 70% is in salaries, and we've kind of locked in those salaries for 5 years, that's good for us too to kind of help with some of those projections as well. Additional costs, special ed and MTSS initiatives. Our special ed costs have, bringing kids back, have increased. Our our staff and people within the district. However, the overall costs have gone down because we're not paying the contracting. We're not paying, NTDSE or other outplacement costs for students. We're starting kind of the MTSS coaches and those costs, but again, those are covered by grants right now too. So kind of mitigating and making sure that those costs don't outweigh the revenues that we have going forward is really what we try to do. Future enrollment shifts obviously will impact staffing, and then other program changes going forward. The economy and the assessments, who knows what the assessor is going to do? It's really hard to say. Luckily when we have the levy coming up, we pay 1.4%, which is based on CPI from 2020, and you pay the taxes for 2021 and 2022, and now potentially 2023. But as long as we can stay on top of that, and continue to maintain our fund balances as they are, we will be fine. New property growth is always hard, and future tax caps, who knows what they'll be in the future. We've gone through all the evidence-based funding implications over the last few years, and we're doing well. We're maintaining. The state has been able to add more money to evidence-based funding. We haven't received any of it, but that's a good thing because we're financially stable enough that we haven't needed to receive any of the new funding, so we're okay. The fair tax was voted down last year. We haven't seen what the repercussions are going to be from that because the world shut down for a year and a half, and so we'll kind of see what goes from there. I don't hear anything of a tax freeze anymore, which is great news. State pension crisis and that cost shift looking forward. I haven't heard anything about the ability to sell bonds. And every now and then we get a new unfunded mandate, but that kind of moves away quickly, and we handle them when they come up. Now I'm done. So just to reiterate, in the future we need to continue, prudent watching, making sure we're still, kind of maintaining that equal flow, that equal increase of revenues and expenditures at the same rate going forward. Any other questions? Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. Up next is our tentative tax levy.
Who could present on that?
Thank you for having me back. So the tax levy, as I kind of mentioned, we only get what we only receive what we are allowed to legally, meaning we can ask for a 20% increase, but legally we're only allowed to receive what we got last year plus CPI, so plus a 1.4% increase. Now again, new property factors into all of that, but and for that reason, the levy that I'm proposing tonight is asking for a 1.8% increase. With that 1.8% increase, we are safe if there is up to $15 million of new property out there, which driving around I haven't seen $15 million of new property within the last year. But we're safe with that amount of new property going forward. We wouldn't lose anything at a district. What I'm expecting to receive is kind of that last column, the estimated extension is about a 1.5% increase. That's the 1.4 plus a little more for the new property. And I'm estimating, again, about what we got last year, about $1 million of new property overall. Slight increase potentially in EAV, but nothing significant like a few years ago, probably a 1 to 2% increase overall again. So this is the tentative levy. The final levy will be brought back to the board in to December to be voted on. But again, part of this levy kind of goes very closely to last year, reducing transportation last year, kind of bringing down that fund balance in transportation, as well as we're not levying as much in the Illinois Municipal Retirement, the IMRF fund, because we were able to reduce that and going forward, don't need as much there. Any questions on the levy?
And don't sit yet, tax rate information.
I'll be quiet after this, I promise. So just kind of looking over at a snapshot of where the district is based on last year's levy and where we ended up. The EAV went up again, just under 2%. The nice thing is that little split that you can see between the bottom two lines is a little bigger in 2020 than it is in 2019. So the top yellow squares are the commercial property, and the bottom blue circle line is the residential property, which means the commercial property within the district, they pay more in taxes than the residential property, which is outstanding for all of our homeowners within the district. When you look at, I'm gonna skip one. When you look at the property tax bill for a random house within the district, the high school, you pay more in taxes to the high school, they've got a higher rate than you do to District 68. Typically elementary schools or elementary districts have a higher rate than the high school rate, but because we've got such a large commercial base within the district, we've got a lower rate, which is great. Overall, as you can see, last year we got levy overall increased a little bit, about that 2.4%, because CPI was 2.3, and sorry, now I'm jumping. But overall, this specific house, the residential property overall only increased their tax bill 1% within the district. So as you can see, year to year between appeals, different assessments, just because we asked for 2.4 doesn't mean each and every house goes up 2.4. Or just because we ask for 20, which we're not, doesn't mean we'll get 20, doesn't mean the property taxes will go up 20. So overall, the township district went up 0.1. Overall, just a small increase with this property. When comparing our EAV and tax rates to other districts within the township, we rank 4th in EAV per pupil, which means of our EAV in our enrollment, we are kind of the 4th highest, which is pretty close to the middle. However, when you look at our total tax rate, we're towards the bottom, which to me says, we're doing more but have a lower tax rate than some other people. Some other people, have a higher tax rate or a lower EAV and the highest tax rate, which makes sense when you look at District 69. They've got the lowest EAV per pupil and the highest tax rate. That makes sense. But we're kind of intertwined the other way. So we've got a lower tax rate for kind of the middle range EAV. I know that's confusing. I'm sorry.
Great.
Any questions on it?
You need a glass of water?
I can talk about taxes.
Could you just define EAV, please, so I can write it down in my glossary that I created for all the acronyms you throw around?
I'm sorry, it's the equalized assessed value.
Thank you.
So the assessor goes out and assesses all the properties, and district-wide, our assessed value is almost 1.1 billion for all the properties within the district. So if somebody wanted to buy the district, theoretically,
Is it a board approval thing? You buy all the homes within the district?
buy all the property within the district,
Not just the
Including
schools?
commercial and.
Yeah.
including commercial.
Come by us, Bezos.
Oh, God.
Now, Cook County does have, you know, an equalizer factor, so realistically, it's probably 3 times that, but don't get me started.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Any other?
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ron.
And now we move on to the Educational Service Center, HVAC.
I'd like to introduce Ryan Berry.
Every time you
I'm
think
getting
you're
a
out.
bus.
Well, there's no presentation for this. So Mr. Nelson, who is our Director of Building and Grounds, is here tonight. And he and I have been working closely with our architect, our engineer firm, as well as our construction management firm, to kind of come up with a couple different scenarios to fix the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in this building that you're in now. Maybe it's just me standing and talking too much, but I've gone from, you know, cold to now clammy, but that's maybe just presenting in front of the board. The heating and air conditioning in this building goes on some pretty big swings, and the beautiful thing in a lot of these offices is you've got very nice exposed brick, which give you kind of that nice, very homey feeling. However, in the winter, it's freezing. We have very many space heaters in offices. The big unit on top, which provides the heating and cooling to the building, is basically at its end of life. I think we had a meeting with the engineer yesterday, and I think he said we basically have the oldest, or at least the last model of the big air conditioner heating unit that we have on the roof. So we can't find parts for it anymore. They don't
Can we
make
get landmark status?
Well, that comes with some funding too, right?
It's about 20 years old, which is at its end of its life, and because they don't make it anymore, we can't find the parts. It's already shut down twice this year. I think, you know, because last year was a mess. I believe the year before, I think there was 1 or 2 days that some ESC staff didn't come in because it was broken down, but yet we were able to fix it and kind of come up. So we've been working with them to try and kind of come up with some scenarios to fix the issues of the building. The first scenario is kind of gutting it, taking everything out, and then putting 8 different units on the roof, much smaller units than we have, redoing all the duct work and everything, which we don't think is necessary. The next 2 options are very close in cost, but one provides much more individualized options when it comes from offices, meeting rooms, things like that. You know, it's funny, you walk from office to office, and one person will have a coat on, and the next person has the window open with a fan. You know, just the range of personal, you know, options and heat sensibility is affected when you've got an old building and an old unit running through it. We're recommending option B for that reason. There's more options, again, individually in different spaces that we'll be able to offer staff and visitors. Am I missing something?
We'll be able to utilize some of the existing mechanical equipment.
Yes.
So, you know, keeping that in mind, and then individual office control, so, which is important.
Right.
It's been proven to increase efficiency, employee
Work output. Yeah, so it's a lot less invasive. It won't take nearly as much time. It's less cost restrictive. So part of the reason for coming tonight is with your blessing on which way we can go. with all of the supply chain issues happening worldwide, if we were to do this in the summer, we would need to order the equipment well before we started the project for something that big. That big, as you can see, the empty pad, if you look outside the back of the building, we ordered generators last spring. They originally told us beginning of August. That turned into beginning of September. That turned into end of November, which we have a few now. But for the last one, we're now looking at March. So almost a full year. So next month, we would come back with a bid solely for the mechanical equipment for the project. And then whichever option we go with, the architects and engineers can kind of provide schematics, bid opportunities, and then we come back in most likely February for bid on the actual work to be done. The installation is right now.
Quick question, so, option B and C are very similar in the total price. You know, obviously the big, what stands out to me is the $100,000 difference on the electrical of both of these.
Yes.
And so I just want to make sure that I'm reading that to be the difference between the individually controlled, you know, thermostats in option B and the inability for the most part to have individual controlled thermostats in option C. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, so option, there are actually different types of units between B and C.
Okay,
So B is more of a gas powered unit,
okay.
which is why I'm trying to bring it up, but now I'm highlighting everything, sorry. So
Also, it's not so much the thermostats, it's the type of unit
It's
that
the type
is
of
the difference
unit,
between the
exactly.
100K, okay.
right, so the electrical work is more in option B because of the individualization of it, but yet without the without the individualization in option B, which is a majority of the electrical work, it's just blowing out hot air all over the place, right? And you're not able to determine what temperature that air should be where it's blowing out. So right by the unit where it blows out will be much hotter than kind of the farther runs away. And the individualization is basically something right by the vent, which allows you to heat the air and determine that amount.
So heating the air in the closest proximity, then
Right.
it's just being pushed
You just
out,
push
and
it out.
you get however much heat you get, the closer or further away you are. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Option C is very close to what we currently have, with the addition of adding a small unit to the east side of the building, because, you know, if you go outside and look at it, the unit is kind of over the EL Parent Center. So by the time the air currently gets to the east side of the building, it's a little colder than, you know, what it is. So B and C both have that option of adding one small unit over there, kind of to maintain the east side of the building a little more. But
There's times of years, well, I'll walk into somebody's office and they're wearing the gloves with their fingertips sticking out. That's not a good work environment for our employees. And I'm afraid that it's gonna just die on us before we get this new one in. So there is some urgency.
Yeah, I was just curious if anybody else was curious between the difference in the you know, 100,000. I mean, I'll just
So
stick my
the
neck out there and
The
say B
total
makes it.
difference
Well, there is
is
one.
just under.
So
The
the
total
addition,
difference, that's what I'm saying, it's not about the total difference. I was just curious about the electrical, so that I could understand better. I wasn't questioning the
I
total
had the
price.
exact same question,
Yeah.
because it was
It's
like,
only like $2,000 difference.
so the additional electrical work, it will be increasing our service to provide, there's gonna be individual reheat coils. So the system is gonna be providing a consistent 55-degree air temperature. So for this room, for example, there'll be a box and there'll be a coil in that box. And in that box is gonna be an electric heat coil. So once that, if it calls for heat, that coil, which is gonna be electrical, that 55 degrees air is gonna hit that hot coil and it's gonna provide more comfort control in this area. And that's gonna be at each individual office. versus option C, you're breaking the area up into 6 squares. And depending on if you have the corner office, now depending on the sun and, you know, you're gonna have hot and cold areas. It provides, option B provides more of a comfort control, individualized comfort control.
That's why I was asking, because on the surface, it looks like they're very close, but it looked like a more substantial difference actually in how people
It's
experience the
because
building in B and C.
Right, yeah.
Such a
When you
bigger
when you look at the breakdown,
electrical
Yeah,
pole.
Does
is that
that,
part of the project?
does that also, based on how you just described it, it sounds much more energy efficient? Is it for the long term for,
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Versus going with the zone is, yes, because the zone temperature is gonna be consistently firing up gas and because you're gonna have hot and cold areas. It's never gonna be satisfied. Versus this system, individual areas are gonna be satisfied versus never being satisfied. Like right now, our system is hardly ever satisfied because you have the zone.
is that gonna have you then calculated into all these projections, how that should then probably decrease, billing basically for your utilities for?
So it'll decrease gas
Yeah.
usage, but it'll probably increase electric because we'll have those individual electric units.
So overall, utility-wise, down the line should be fairly similar to what we're paying now between the two of them. You know, as Mr. Nelson said, right now in the afternoon, we've got the sun beating on the south end of the building and the north, you know, so that's too hot and it's calling for cooling, but you've got the north end or the northeast end saying it's freezing over here, we need hot air, and then, you know, so it's always constantly running something. Which is what you get with an old building.
I grew up with an HVAC expert in the house, so I feel compelled to make sure that I understand.
Get them fresh. Okay, so in December, we'll see bids
December, we'll
for
see,
that?
we'll see bids for the mechanical equipment.
Okay.
We don't need to push toward any of the options at this point.
Yeah, do we need to?
Well, our thought was to go out and get bids for option B, and then you would come back and see the various options.
Within B.
Okay.
And now again, the options, the bids will just be for the mechanical equipment. And then the, you know, because we need to basically pre-order that well in advance. And then the bids for the rest of the actual work and installation will come in the spring.
So there'll be another bid for that.
I mean,
Can I just ask a very, it might be complicated, but I'm just a bit curious longitudinally between options A and B. The ducting for the building, I presume, is actually quite old. I would assume.
It is, and in option B, the part of the cost, overall cost of option B is to increase, like grab some of the joints and the sections to increase the efficiency of the existing ductwork, so that there's less demo work associated with that project. Because if we went through and removed all the ductwork and all the equipment above the ceiling, that's a huge, that's a much bigger cost than demolition because of having to remove the acoustic ceiling, all possibly the light fixtures, so on and so forth.
We'd have to move out of the building for a period of time, I guess.
Versus this option, we'll keep the furniture in the building, we'll cover it, we'll protect it, but we don't have to do a lot of overhead work.
So that wouldn't be like so option A would be more than a summer project, you're talking like is that like a 6-month kind of thing, or?
Our project management company said that they could get it done
Right.
over the summer, but that means that we would have to move all the entire ESC staff probably into a gymnasium or individual classrooms in one of our buildings, but then there's gonna be much more a lot more logistics associated with that project than option B.
and just having, with A, you also have now 8 units, you know, on the rooftop as opposed to 2. So, you know, warranty wise, not a big deal, but I mean, just the fact of, you know, when's one gonna break? Hopefully it's just one, you kind of come up with it, you know. It's a lot more invasive, and there's not a lot of room when you lift one of the ceiling tiles between the roof, and that's why it costs so much more too to rip everything out and to put it back in, because there's just not space.
Does this fit your timeline and the feedback we're giving you? Does this?
Yeah, absolutely. Our goal is to make sure we're able to replace it before it dies completely and we have to find a new temporary home for potentially months while we're waiting on a new one.
Is there a mitigation plan in the event that the current HVAC doesn't make it until the new one is in place?
We will make it work. We're friends with eBay and things where we can buy, we will get the
I'm
equipment
confident.
working. It's a little-
I think we're gonna get it done.
We
Yeah,
can't buy it
stationary
from
mic hooked up to the
a
generator.
mechanical equipment company, we can find it on eBay.
Thank you. Yeah,
He's not joking when he says that.
Yeah.
That's,
You look serious.
yeah, I mean, that's
Very
because it's,
convincing.
because the unit again is 20 years old and they don't make it anymore, it's basically the last model of that type of unit. You know,
I think that's, for that reason is why option A just kind of looked more appealing, cause it's like, when you're talking about that kind of mechanical stuff, and you're talking like, just throwing it out there, fast forwarding, like, you do option A, for the next 5 years, you have the parts you need more readily available versus that option. I guess that's what made A look a little bit more appealing to me, just from that systemic of change of parts and as, you know, machines evolve and so forth, that kind of thing.
I mean, overall, those machines in A cost a lot less than B and C, just based purely on size. But again, you know, also with that though, adding that many more units, there's a lot more reinforcement that we have to do within the building. So it's not just in the ceiling, it's, you know, reinforcing that, what is it, a 5-ton unit?
Yes.
Yeah, so, you know, the one we put in, I think is 20.
The octagon unit?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
So that's 20, so a 5-ton unit, still 10,000 pounds.
Sure.
You know, so we need to reinforce more areas too, and that's also why it's,
Is that a helicopter installation?
you know, we've been asking, but I don't think so.
Oh.
Not for a one-story building.
We saw it was just maybe a year ago. We saw it at Old Orchard. They were taking advantage of the slow time. They had a helicopter up there
Was it
replacing
a
some.
helicopter? I thought they had a crane.
There was a crane over there, yeah.
No, there was, I definitely saw a helicopter replacing a unit. It was like maybe a year ago. Anyway, we digress.
Sure, Joe.
Any other? Well, we haven't done it at my place of work. I was there that day. We called it. Good times. Anyway. All right, we shall move on to the IASB 2021 Resolutions Committee Report.
Joe, I was hoping Ryan could help to go.
Ryan. Pull up a chair, Ryan.
Whatever you need.
We may need him as a tiebreaker because we had a couple deadlock votes. So yes, promises to be an interesting conference this weekend. As, if you missed the email on your way in today, we are severing our ties with the National School Board as the state of Illinois has made that decision. So check your emails, and I'm sure I'll be getting a little bit of skinny on that tomorrow. In the meantime, of the 23 items on the docket, we were in agreement on 17 of them, not only with each other, but with the recommendations by the committee. So it really comes down to talking about the other 6, 4 of which are because of one abstention on the board in each of them. Literally deadlocked at 3-3. So we may need a swing vote here on the bench. I also suspect that if we're that divided on them, that ultimately they'll be as divided tomorrow. And I think we've learned that on divided resolutions, they simply aren't gonna go because nobody wants to see something in writing that 50% can't agree with. So just to quickly brush up on those, I will choose not to read through the 17 that we're most agreement on. It starts with resolution number 2. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the perennial, this one is the Student Safety and Protection Plan. We are split 3-3 with one abstention. The committee is recommending to adopt it. And happy to have a discussion about this, just because I want to, this may feel like we simply abstain as a board from providing an opinion on resolution number 2.
So would you read all of them for us so that we can?
Yes, I can tell you the 6 we'll talk about. It's numbers 2, 3, 9.
These are all split.
These are, oh, sorry, apologies, the 4 that are split are 2, 9, 11, and 15. I bring up 3, board compensation was a close vote, 3-4 against. So that we are with the recommendation on 3. 12 was a close vote, 4-3-4, in which we oppose we are in favor of the resolution, which the recommendation is to not adopt. So on 3 and 12, we're simply close. If anyone wanted to discuss those, because we were so close on them, but look at 2, 9, 11, and 15 are the ones where we have no immediate resolution in the room.
Can I ask okay, so 3 was the compensation one, and then there was one for childcare. Where did we land on that?
Childcare, we agreed with the
The recommendation.
childcare reimbursement. Yeah, we were 5-1-4. So that is an easy guess.
Joe, could you remind us of what the recommendation was for 2?
4 is
You got
in bold.
2 already to adopt, 9
4 is
and 11, please, and 15.
Sorry, yes. So 9, the recommendation is to adopt. 11, the recommendation is not to adopt. And 15, the recommendation is not to adopt. I sent you it before I noticed an error. If you look at the actual votes on
Got it,
it's that
okay.
last one. Yeah. Oh, am I wrong?
That was your,
Are we 1, 2, 3, 4?
that was your updated
Okay.
2.
Yeah, sorry, I may have miscalculated 15. We are actually 4 and 2 on 15, so that is, we are
We can
recommending do adopt 15. We don't have to discuss that. Apologies.
So 2, 3, 9, and 12.
2, 9, and 11. Hang on, sorry, tried not to make this complicated.
So no longer 15?
15 is no longer something we need to discuss. We are 4-2 for passing 15.
And 12, we no longer need.
12, correct. We are 4-3.
2, 9, 11.
2 is the one where you have the argument that in certain counties want to be able to ensure safety because they have difficulty with getting SROs anywhere near the buildings and they have low response times from police officers because of the distance that has to be traveled.
Yeah,
This is-
that's one that in different parts of the state really plays out differently. If I may add my 2 cents to that conversation, I do see here that they are recommending that the superintendent would have to give approval for an employee to carry a firearm, which that'll be really simple because I'm not going to do it. I won't approve of an employee to carry a firearm. As long as that authority is granted to me,
Right.
That's kind of
we
why.
don't necessarily have to worry about it happening here. Because I would not feel like it was a safe environment if teachers, custodians, superintendents, or anybody else was walking around packing. That's not a comfortable childhood and educational environment for me. But again, this is a lobbying point. But
Well, and I guess, Jim, a couple of years ago, this has come up a couple times, and just I think part of it is trying to position ourselves in the situation of areas of the state that, right, don't have access to, I guess, immediate policing. I think the only thing here that gave me a sense of safety was the superintendent's, ultimate decision. the wisdom of the
And
superintendent.
not only me, but then you guys would have
Right.
to
Yeah,
support
so-
that too.
Knowing your area of the state and things like that, so.
And that was kind of my point. I don't worry so much about it passing for our community because we have local control over, you know, whether that's actually something we would want to do. But it would give other communities who might feel differently about it or have different circumstances the ability to do it.
Can I ask for a clarification before we discuss this one?
Sure.
My understanding was if we are voting as like individuals, how we sort of lean on things, it's about whether or not we think this should even be brought into a conversation at the
Correct.
convention, right? So this is one that I voted in support of, in part because I feel like it's worth having a conversation because of the fact that a district that has very different circumstances, maybe something that others just don't understand or have a understanding about, and I felt like having the conversation, this is not something that I would support for my district by any stretch of the imagination, but I can imagine scenarios where having that conversation at least and allowing people to consider the perspective there made sense, and so for me, that was why I put my vote in support of it, is because I think it's worthwhile to at least have the conversation based on the ways that they've constructed the argument here. And not because I think that SROs belong in schools or guns belong in schools, but that there was enough here in terms of the context, specific aspects that I felt was worthy of a conversation. So that's,
I think I'm unclear. I thought we were deciding when you are at the conference, how you would cast our vote, whether in favor or opposed to this, whether we want it to pass or not.
Yes, so
because I clarified that with you before I wrote down my decisions on things.
So I think there's very likely it will never get to a vote. These, specifically these, the ones that are as contentious as they are, because people don't want to formalize a vote that knocks out something. I think for years, it might have actually gotten a vote 2 years ago or last
There was
year.
once I think it did.
But
Yeah.
anything dealing with guns in schools is very hard to even get to the point that we would have cast a vote. So yes, it is really for us to have a vote in the case that it gets to that point.
No.
I don't know what my responsibility is up until then. I don't think I'm part of the conversation for our board, but this will be my first time going, so.
You're in a room with 1,000 people,
Right.
and you hold a paddle up.
No, it's an app this year.
Oh,
No more
now.
paddles.
Okay, they're doing an app this year.
Shall I know the
Bring your own paddle.
silent vote?
That takes away all the allure of going.
I mean, I'm gonna call Frank and try.
And so ultimately, what is done here at this meeting is it forms a lobbying position for the IASB. It doesn't mean anything changes, other than they would then express that was the wishes of the IASB, the school boards in Illinois. So, it's sort of a step to advocate for something or to not advocate for something. It's not it's not an action that really takes place unless it would eventually get adopted by legislators.
I understand. I guess what I'm still wanting to make sure, when we were checking yes or no on these individual items, it wasn't whether, at least I was not checking, yes, I think this should be discussed.
Right.
I was
Correct.
checking,
No,
yes, I
you-
support it, no, I
Yes,
don't.
apologies, yeah.
And so I don't know if people were perhaps.
I was checking based on whether I think it should be discussed, although I have very strong opinions about some of them. This one, I thought should be discussed, but I know how I would vote on it, and it would not be in favor.
So that
Our
changes your.
So does that change your vote?
Yeah, that changes mine too.
There are
honestly.
Our collective vote is.
So then if this came up to vote collectively, we now oppose.
We
Right,
oppose, yeah.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
thank you for the clarification.
No, that's wonderful, and I apologize for that.
So screw up on it.
Anything. All right.
The next one's
The
9.
next one is.
The next one is 9, health and sex ed.
I have a whole thing
Alright.
I wrote about this. I'll defer.
Alright. I'm assuming you're following along at home. If not, just a quick, this would advocate for local school district control of content and curriculum for health and sex ed courses.
And then we were split on
What
this.
is our vote?
We are 3-3 with one abstention. And I'll be transparent, I did not vote because I was very curious to see how the votes would come in, and the votes came in split, so I'm very curious to hear how this conversation goes. Not to play swing vote, but I do have a vote in my pocket, and
Noel, I feel like you're ready to go.
anyone?
And I will do the
Yes, please.
opposition if that's not where you're headed. I feel they're probably on the same. I have some serious concerns about this entire, the way that this is talked about in terms of having a science-based or science-informed curricula that is locally contextually specific based on what the majority of people in a district might want in terms of sex education. Abstinence-only education is science-informed sex education that actually reduces positive outcomes in terms of overall things. We know this from decades and decades of having abstinence-only education in the United States. It is not shown that abstinence-only education actually does any of the things you want it to do. So if you look at countries that have primarily comprehensive-based sex education, the rates of teenage pregnancies are 4 to 6 per 1,000 in most European countries and 30 in 1,000 in the United States. The rates of STIs among young people in the Netherlands is 10% of all sexually transmitted infections, whereas in the United States it's 25 to 50% depending on what region we're in. So if you're looking at, sex education in terms of values are something that individual families should be able to choose for themselves in terms of their religious values or various other values. But one of the other things that's been found with a lot of these more conservative abstinence-only or fear-based sex education models is that they're also discriminatory against minorities. In particular, certain minorities get talked to as though they are more hypersexualized, which is based on a long history of problems with racism. In addition, we already know that those kinds of curricula are particularly poor fit for people who are non-cisgender and non-heterosexual, and that a lot of this kind of stuff causes major health problems, including mental health problems and very high rates of suicidality. And so it can be a science-based sex education curriculum, but if it's not a comprehensive sex-based curriculum, it is not in the best interest of the wider health and safety and overall wellness of any of your public students. It's public education, and we need to be serving the wider public and not just the values of a particular place. My other concern with it is, and this is, I will stop here, clearly it's a hot button issue for me, but my other concern is for people that are in the minority in a particular place, this is where you can have the tyranny of the majority that can actually cause really poor health outcomes for minorities that are in those particular areas. And public schools are charged with serving the wider public regardless. So I don't feel that this particular idea serves the public adequately. I'm stopping there. She said everything I'd want to say and more. And patriarchy. We'll throw that in there.
I, in principle, agree, absolutely, on all the fronts. I think that as written, however, it isn't a value statement. The potential for local values to be the guiding force here and to undermine minoritized communities is absolutely possible. This is written, though, there isn't a values-driven component to the language here. And so when I read it, I was worried about all those other things. But at the same time, it does allow a school board in a municipality that is focused on inclusivity, is focused on culturally relevant pedagogy around sex and health to do just the opposite, which is to inform the community and the students. And so I see the potential for both extremes here, but this document as written isn't specifically stating for me enough to make me think that it's only focused on abstinence-based, for example, sex education philosophy. So I struggled with this too because I worry about all of the things that you stated, but as written, it doesn't emphasize one or the other, and I worry that perhaps a local school board does want to have other modes of education, more diverse modes, especially as we talk about gender inclusivity, that it does give a school board the ability to have broader conversations about health and sexuality for communities that have more gender-specific experiences. And so I see the other extreme being limited if we don't have a policy like this. So,
The way I read that though, because of course it's not gonna mention abstinence only, because you can frame it within the scientific framework, is you have to do the bare minimum of what the state is providing. So that it says, right, you have to start teaching consent in kindergarten and scaffolds up. So if you wanted to make it more enriching, there isn't anything necessarily restricting you from doing that, right? Because at least the foundation is there, is the way I'm understanding it, versus like, this would give you the autonomy to disregard the very basics that are now in law of what you must require, is how I interpreted it.
Yeah, it's hard not to interpret that it is in response to the Senate bill, right? That, and it's maybe not coincidentally from the same district we just debated on gun use. So my gut is that they're not trying to be more inclusive
Right.
in their education, but yeah, this is the trick of the law, right? Once it's-
But I guess you could potentially be opening yourself up for liability if you went the other way and went super inclusive, I guess, if you weren't adopting such a thing.
well, as written, it says, that it's passing, the intent is to pass legislation for age developmentally appropriate, medically accurate, complete, and culturally appropriate, inclusive, and trauma-informed comprehensive curriculum. If you take that language on its face value, it is more open. If you look at the district that's initiating this, that's when we get the worry. See, so again, right, the district that's initiating, I hate this,
Well, But I wanted to speak to that. To me, it wasn't the district. I don't take it at face value at all, because that sort of coded language is used nationwide. It's not just this district, it's not just this state, it's not just this meeting. This is the same coded language that's used to support abstinence-based sex education, has been for decades. We were able to get a statewide set of standards passed that is tremendous, particularly compared to many of our neighboring states. And I just personally couldn't support poking holes in it, which is what I think this is attempting to do in sheep's clothing.
Any other thoughts?
For point of clarification, it wasn't my understanding that we could abstain as an option.
Valid. Yeah, no,
I
It's
want
not,
to say that
this
for
is
the
a-
record.
And,
Pressure applies.
and I appreciate it, and if you forgot to hand in your ballot, it would still be even number. I'm gonna side with the nose on this one and make this 3-4.
I'll confess, I found number 6 so mind-bogglingly dull that I abstained and told
Yes.
Joe that if he needed me to care, I would. But I just couldn't.
I mean, I
All
wasn't.
these years, I didn't know those were
And quite honestly, I consciously wasn't abstaining as much as withholding my vote, really to see if there would be a discussion or it would be an easy answer. And the 2 I abstained on are 2 of the 6. And the other 2 abstentions were also 2 of the 6. But there were very few abstentions otherwise. Which leads us to our last one, and it is, again, my abstention, but it's really just, I just honestly didn't know how to vote on number 11, clean energy federal funding. And this is out of Champaign, urging the Congress to provide federal funding to school districts for clean energy infrastructure, including but not limited to solar panels, geothermal heating, cooling, and wind turbines. The recommendation is not to adopt it on the justification that it's already, is it already somewhere in law?
The recommendation is that to do adopt, right?
No.
No, it's just
No,
not.
it's not.
Oh, it's
Potential value in clean
Yes.
energy projects,
Oh.
but did not find the need to support the proposed resolution.
Oh,
I
What
found
was
this
our
one.
vote? Joe?
Our vote is 3-3 at the moment.
Oh, that's it.
So it was, again, I just couldn't wrap my brain around.
Yeah, and I read that very cryptic last sentence as a, it wasn't so much the last sentence. Oh, yes, it was the last sentence that that the committee acknowledged the value, but didn't find the need to support as very, very, very difficult to manage. I was very torn on this one because, I don't think, I read this as the committee not feeling like the argument was laid out in a way that they felt like they could fully support it, but,
I wonder if
thought
we
this was
could go
kind
to
of
our
a
friend
cop-out
Ryan.
last line.
I would like to go to our friend Ryan on this one. Is the argument that we're always trying to get federal funding? Is this something where it may not be a priority for an educational institution to seek that funding? Is it simply that?
My quick, my reading of it, when I look at it, is, kind of, as what Jordan mentioned, is they're saying, I'd rather lobby Congress for something else.
Right.
That's kind of how I'm reading in between the lines. If they give us funding to put solar panels up, we'll put solar
Yeah,
panels. Absolutely.
If Congress would like to help us solve the climate crisis, do our part locally, I would be all for that.
Absolutely.
Chances of that.
I think that's really like kind of like that grassroots movement. Like if you're really trying to say, like if schools are pushing for that, like that's why I kind of was like, I don't know why you wouldn't have done it, because why not say yes? Have the, and kind of to her point, like have the conversation, like get people actually talking about it. Because if you look at some of the, just like with the SRO conversation, it's different folks, different strokes. But down south, where they could use that money back from utilities because they are so low funded with other things. How about we cut their electricity bill in half so they can use that money to actually fund their lunch program for their pre-introduced kids? Like, why the hell not? I guess that's the way I look at it. Is like I thought about those. I friggin' worked in Oswego. They could use 50% off their bills. Trust me. So that's why I was like, if there's a way to get them there, like, why the hell not?
I will move over to the yes and make it a 4-3, and unless anybody has any other,
You're moving to support?
moving to support.
Good.
I just have a comment, I'm not changing my vote, that I think what the tacit threat is that the diversion of federal funding. That's what, and it's written in a very, strategic way to say, some districts are already undertaking projects that are, energy efficient projects. And, there's a concern if federal funding is provided for this sort of thing, then what other, bread and butter, taken very loosely, because our environment is bread and butter, what other federal funding might that district not get? And so it was just a tacit enough threat for me to be worried about it. But
Working in CPS and seeing kind of like the way their HVAC kind of stuff works. I was literally in a gym where I could physically see the wall expanding, and they can't. And that was a coach's office, and they could not fix that building until the pipe burst. And I'm like, if they could use those kind of schools where you think of Walter Payton CPS, and you think of Southside, there is vastly different resources, and the money is never equally dispersed with federal funding. So a school like that could use that kind of help that was where I came first. My head went to all of those Southside schools that could use that break and take that money and actually give it to the kids who need the free and reduced program.
But it doesn't-
I know it's
doesn't
never
mandate that
ideally
they-
like that.
Yeah, it doesn't mandate the cost savings will go to
It
the
doesn't.
places though.
If there's a
Yeah.
chance that at least the conversation goes like, well, if we're doing this, where can we move it? Like
Yeah.
someone needs to have that conversation. We might as well get schools talking about it.
That's true, it requires the school districts to have the judgment to take the cost savings and invest them in HVAC, or to take the cost savings and invest them in school lunches. And this doesn't provide that kind of guarantee that those funds, the savings will be, made for that, so.
Thank you.
Oh,
This
no,
is really
Jeff-
what I was hoping.
No, Jeff was trying to.
Oh, Jeff, please.
The same thought process led me to vote no. And it was because this is specifically for energy projects that I think richer school districts are gonna do. I can't see the day CPS is gonna be putting a lot of money into geothermal.
Lauterbrook as it is.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So that was but I told Joe when I sent it that I was really ambivalent about this one, and I'm quite satisfied with the yes. I'm not gonna lose sleep.
I weighted your vote, but you only got a half.
It was 0.5.
It was only half. So, no, thank you all, really, this was, I'm glad we could have some of these conversations.
So So those are
So
the
where do
only
we
three
land? Are we
split?
4-3 now?
So we are 4-3-4, and so I can send I can send you all this breakdown so you can see at least the totals for all of our votes. And I will do that via email, and I'll have a fascinating weekend in sunny downtown Chicago. Wonderful. Then we move on to our action items, starting with our 2022 bus leases. Is that this one?
Do we need a motion
You're
first?
supposed to read it.
Oh, let me do this. Oh my goodness, okay. I call for a motion to approve the lease agreement between School District 68 and Midwest Transit Equipment, Inc. for a 5-year lease for one new 2023 ICCE 72 passenger bus for a lease price of $15,707 per year, and one new 2022 Chevy Collins 29/32 passenger bus for a lease price of $12,159 per year as presented.
So this is a report that you typically would see in the spring. However, again, with the supply chain issues, in order for us to get the buses sometime next summer, we need to kind of put the order in now. I believe the 32 passenger bus we should get in early July, and they're telling us the bigger 71 passenger bus is probably early to mid-August at this point. And that's just when they start the lines and change everything over. The 71 passenger bus is just a replacement of a lease. The 32 passenger bus is actually kind of it's a new bus lease. We don't have an additional 32 passenger bus, but as I mentioned before, having more special ed students back in the district and bringing them back, and also as Mrs. Vanessa mentioned earlier, our new ECC class with NTDSE. A majority of those students are our students, and we're able to transport them. We believe we can provide better transportation services than other contract services. It's also cheaper for us to rent a whole new bus. We haven't needed to do that this year because transportation numbers have been down, so we've been able to kind of reduce a route in order to gain an extra special ed route as of right now. But just going forward, we see that class at ECC staying there, more RISE students staying within the district, and that's what we're looking to add an additional 32 passenger bus. Some long-winded version of that 2 sentences that I wrote.
Any questions?
Rechner,
Yes.
Sturbanks,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Warshaw.
Yes.
Bell Jordan. Yes. Espinosa.
Yes.
Joseph.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to our MOU for teacher evaluations, I call for a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding between Skokie School District 68 Board of Education and the Skokie School District 68 Education Association that suspends formal observations for tenured teachers for the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved. Second.
Okay, if you'll recall, last year, we had a similar memorandum of understanding after various associations, including the Illinois State School Board, advocated for flexibility in not doing formal evaluations, since our teachers for a good deal of the year, the vast majority of them were home and teaching under great duress and in situations where they weren't accustomed to teaching and principals weren't accustomed to observing. Fast forward to this year, we've been encouraged to give the same kind of flexibility to teachers because the situation, the teaching and learning situation is still very different. And very importantly, the principal workload this year is vastly different than it's been in past years, with our principals spending hours a day doing things that didn't exist really prior to COVID, for example. I know I spent the last 3 days with principals in a gym, manning the vaccination clinics, and that's pretty much all they did all day. In between shield testing, that's hours every week that takes up principal time. So there's a lot of additional things that is on their plate that makes getting the evaluations, all the formal evaluations done a great challenge. In addition, by doing this, there's some parity reestablished between teachers who didn't get formally evaluated last year. The other half then would be offered the same. There is an exception to this year's memorandum of understanding in that we are going to formally evaluate tenured teachers this year. So it's much, non-tenured, thank you, yeah. Non-tenured teachers will be formally evaluated. That takes a lot off the principal's plate, allows them the time to do that and to focus on the development of those new teachers in supporting them and giving them good feedback. So this is what we think that is the best thing to do for our school system, for our teachers, and for our principal system. Any questions? And we hope not to be in a situation where we'll be talking about another MOU next year with regards to evaluation or anything COVID related, hopefully.
Sturbeck,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Jordan. Yes. Espinoza,
Yes.
Joseph,
Yes.
Ruffner.
Yes.
There's a test here for you. In that I forgot to write the motion for the semi-closed.
Oh, okay, so,
Make up a motion.
let's see. Let me go to the agenda. That's cheap. I now call for a motion to approve the semi-annual review of closed session minutes. In this case, we are reviewing the April 15th, 2021, May 20th, 2021, and May 26th, 2021 closed session minutes. Recommending that they all be open, in line with our attorney and administration recommendations.
So moved.
Second.
Introducing improv.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Jordan. Yes. Espinoza.
Yes.
Joseph,
Yes.
Ruffner,
Yes,
Sturbeck.
Yes.
everyone enjoy those. Now open. Really exciting. I do appreciate they included Annie leaving the room for 3 minutes. The highlight of one of
Oh,
those
right,
closed
right.
sessions.
yeah, that was.
All right, we did have 3 requests and or responses for information under the Freedom of Information Act during the period October 16th, 2021 through November 12th, 2021. On October 19th, the district received a request from Bernadette Soto of the Chicago Regional Council of Carpenters requesting contracts and correspondence between 68 and specific named contractors. The response was sent October 21st. On October 21st, the district received a request from Vince Espy of Local Labs requesting information related to Panorama Education. Response was sent on October 21st. On October 28th, the district received a request from Marcel Kentre requesting documents related to Transportation and Food Services, RFPs. The response was sent on October 28th. If there is no further business to come before the board, I call for a motion to adjourn.
So.
Second.
And Warshaw,
Yes.
Bill Jordan. Yes. Espinoza.
Yes.
Joseph.
Yes.
I
Ruffner.
abstain? Yes.
Sturbeck,
Yes.
Sullivan.
Yes.
Thank
Is that enough?
you.
I think the proper wording, so.